Have you ever taken financial advice from an advertisement and never even known it? Because that is exactly what happened to millions of people for almost 100 years now. You have heard of this book, The Richest Man in Babylon. Maybe someone told you it changed their life. Maybe you saw it on a best books for your 20s list, right next to Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And look, it probably has changed lives. But here is the thing nobody tells you when they hand you this book like it is scripture. It was not written as scripture. It was written as a pamphlet, a marketing pamphlet, handed out for free by banks and insurance companies back in the 1920s to convince employees to open savings accounts and buy life insurance. Now, that does not make the advice wrong, but it changes everything about how you should be reading it. So here is what we are going to do. We are going to go through the actual 7 cures our card gives. The same 7 cures every summary on this platform recycles word for word. But we are also going to put them next to what people are saying about money right now on shows like Diary of a CEO, people like David Bach and Ben Felix, people who study this for a living. And we are going to ask the question nobody asks. Does advice written for 1920s Babylon still hold up today? Or have you been reciting ancient advertising copy and calling it wisdom? Stick around, because by the end of this, you are going to know exactly which parts of this book to keep and which parts might be quietly costing you money. It is honestly wild when you realize millions of people are treating a 1926 bank brochure like it is some sort of sacred text, like it was carved on a mountaintop. George S., the author, was not a philosopher. He was not some ancient sage channeling Mesopotamian wisdom. He was a guy who sold road maps, literal road maps. He ran the Clason map company out of Denver, Colorado, and he actually published the first road atlas of the United States and Canada. Think about the specific mindset of a map maker. Your entire job is to take a vast, chaotic, intimidating landscape and distill it down into clear, bold lines, lines that a completely overwhelmed traveler can follow without crashing their car. Clason looked at the financial landscape of 1920s America, a period where consumer credit was exploding. People were buying cars and radios on installment plans for the first time ever. It was the roaring 20s, and everyone was borrowing. The average worker was drowning in these new financial products, and Clason realized they needed a map. But if you hand a tired factory worker a dry pamphlet on compound interest, they throw it straight in the trash. You have to wrap the medicine in sugar. You need a story. Let us start with something almost nobody mentions. Clason did not set this book in Rome. He did not set it in Athens. He picked Babylon, and that is not an accident. Babylon is where the earliest known interest-bearing loans come from. It is where written property law first shows up, carved into clay tablets thousands of years before contracts existed anywhere else. This is not a fantasy backdrop for a bedtime story about a poor man who gets rich. It is the actual birthplace of the financial tools you are using right now: your mortgage, your savings account, the interest on your credit card. All of it traces back to the same city Arcad is walking around in, so when you read this book, you are not just reading a fable. You are reading a guy in the 1920s dramatizing real financial history to sell you a product. Keep that in mind. It matters for everything that comes next. That setting really does matter, because it works as a kind of psychological disarmament. By grounding the advice in the literal birthplace of mathematics and contract law, Clason bypasses the reader's natural skepticism. If a banker in a tailored suit hands you a flyer in 1926 that says deposit your wages in our vault, your defenses go up immediately. You know you are the mark. You know he is selling you something. But if that same banker hands you a thrilling, beautifully illustrated fable about a chariot builder and a camel trader in a 4,000-year-old desert empire, your defenses drop. You are entertained. You are disarmed by the story. Modern audiences are actually completely familiar with this pattern. It is the grandfather of native advertising. You are watching a highly produced documentary on YouTube about, say, historical espionage. You are completely engrossed in the narrative, and then the host pivots without even blinking. And speaking of keeping your secrets safe from foreign spies, you need to protect your digital footprint with today's sponsor. That is exactly what The Richest Man in Babylon is. It is a seamlessly integrated sponsor. The banks literally bought these pamphlets in bulk, put their own logos on the front, and handed them to customers. The only reason it exists as a compiled book today is because the individual pamphlets were so successful, they eventually got bound together. So, stripping away the Babylonian costume is the only way to actually evaluate the advice. We have to look at the raw mechanics being sold, and cross-reference them with the behavioral economics we actually have today. Because once you know you are reading an advertisement, you stop asking, is this holy? And you start asking, does the math actually work? Which brings us to the 7 cures. Arcad's number is 10%. Every coin you earn, 1 in 10 stays with you before it touches anything else. Rent does not touch it. Food does not touch it. It is gone before you even feel like you had it. Now here's where it gets interesting. On Diary of a CEO, David Bach teaches almost the exact same idea. He calls it pay yourself first. But his number is not 10%. It is roughly 1 hour of your workday's income, which for most people lands closer to 12.5%. So which one is right? Arcad writing in the 1920s or Bach talking about paychecks and rent today? That gap between 10% and 12.5% is worth sitting with because it is the difference between just surviving and actually building something. The genius of Clason introducing that original 10% rule is the physical analogy he uses to explain it, the egg basket. Arcad tells his students to imagine an egg merchant with a basket. Every morning, the merchant puts 10 eggs into the basket, but every evening, he only takes 9 eggs out. Because he is putting in 1 more than he is taking out, the basket eventually overflows. It is not magic, it is just physics and volume. Clason takes this highly emotional, usually anxiety-inducing concept of money and reduces it to the physical reality of eggs in a basket. That egg basket works beautifully for the 1920s, but the modern financial environment has completely changed how we take the eggs out. The friction is gone. We do not carry silver pieces in a pouch anymore. We operate in a completely frictionless spending environment. Tap to pay, one-click ordering, auto-renewing subscriptions. You do not even feel the money leaving. It is just a double click of a button on your phone, and the money is gone. When David Bach talks about this on his Diary of a CEO episode, he modernizes that egg basket with some math that is genuinely sobering. He asks people what magic number they think would completely change their lives, and the universal answer is usually around $10,000. Bach reverse engineers that $10,000 figure down to the micro level. To waste $10,000 a year, you have to waste $27.40 a day. He challenges the audience to find that $27.40 in their daily routine, the extra coffees, the unread subscriptions, the delivery convenience fees, because it adds up fast. But if you intercept that $27.40 a day and invest it over a standard 40-year working career, the compounding math turns that daily waste into over $4,400,000. That is $4 million from intercepting lunch money, essentially. But if you try to manually save $27.40 a day right now, you will fail, because you will forget, or you will justify spending it. Relying on human willpower to manually log into a banking app and move money at the end of the month is a lost cause. The algorithms actively trying to separate you from your money never sleep, so you have to beat the algorithm. Bach's entire philosophy is that paying yourself first has to be entirely automatic. The routing has to happen before the money ever clears your checking account. That 10% or 12.5% has to be diverted at the payroll level straight into the investment account. You have to create structural friction between you and your own money. If you can see the balance on your phone, you will find a way to justify spending it. Say you do automate that 12% out of your paycheck. 2 days later, your phone buzzes with a highly targeted ad for a piece of tech you have been casually researching, and suddenly that automated saving feels less like a smart financial move and more like punishment. It feels like deprivation, which is the exact psychological trap Clason recognized. The next cure is simple. Do not confuse what you need with what you want. Most people, Arcad says, let their wants grow to fill whatever they earn. This is basically Morgan's entire argument in his Diary of a CEO episode, just in different words. As wealth is what you do not see. It is not the car, it is not the house, it is the number that never shows up anywhere because you never spent it. He talks about lifestyle creep, the slow habit of upgrading everything the second you can afford to, and how that quietly keeps people poor no matter how much they earn. Arcad called it controlling thy expenditures, calls it avoiding lifestyle creep. Same idea, 100 years apart. There is a moment in the book where one of Arcad's students interrupts this exact lesson, furious at the idea of a budget. He says a budget is like a collar. It strips away the joy of life and reduces a free man to a beast of burden, which is how most people feel the first time they try to budget. But Arcad does not shame him. Instead, he reframes the concept entirely. He tells the student that the true purpose of a budget is not to restrict him, it is to help him realize his most cherished desires, as opposed to only casual wishes. Cherished desires versus casual wishes. Put that ancient advice up against the modern reality of advertising, and the comparison gets uncomfortable. Arcad only had to physically walk past a merchant in a market and say no to a rug. We carry the market in our pockets. It is buzzing at us constantly. Designed by teams of data scientists who understand our psychological triggers better than we understand them ourselves. So is control thy expenditures hopelessly naive advice today. Telling someone to budget now can feel like telling someone to stop being hungry while locking them inside a bakery. It is exponentially harder today. The cognitive load required to resist modern marketing is genuinely exhausting. But that is where Morgan Housel's definition of wealth becomes a survival tool, because he shifts where the reward comes from. Right now, society gives you a reward for displaying wealth. You buy the $100,000 car, people see it, you feel successful. But Housel points out the mathematical truth. The only thing anyone actually knows about your finances when you drive a $100,000 car is that you have $100,000 less than you did yesterday. You do not see the wealth. You see the depreciating asset, so you have to learn to find the reward in the invisible wealth, the swagger in the unspent money. Invisible wealth is optionality. It is knowing you have the financial runway to walk away from a toxic job on a Tuesday and not panic about Friday's rent. That is the ultimate flex. It is the freedom to take a year off to care for a sick parent. Lifestyle creep, upgrading your apartment and your wardrobe the moment you get a promotion, is essentially volunteering to pay a tax on your own ego. You are trading your future freedom for a slightly nicer couch today. Once you rewire that reward loop, once you stop buying the couch and start actually accumulating that 10 or 12.5%, you hit the third major hurdle. You have the gold. Now what are the actual mechanics of making it grow? Which leads to cure 3. Arcad tells his gold to work for him, so that while he sleeps, it is out there earning more gold. In the book, that means lending at interest. Today, answer to this is almost aggressively simple. Buy index funds. Do not try to be clever. Time in the market beats timing the market. And Ben Felix, in his own diary of a CEO episode, backs this up from the evidence side. Most people do not lose money because the math is against them. They lose money because of what they do: panic selling, chasing trends, trying to outsmart a system that rewards patience over cleverness. Gold multiplying itself is just compounding, wearing an ancient robe. Clason illustrates the mechanics of that compounding through 2 distinct characters in the book. First, there is a farmer who invests 10 pieces of silver when his son is born. He lends it to a moneylender, and the money earns interest. But crucially, the farmer does not spend the interest. He rolls it back in. He adds the interest back to the principal. The money has children, and those children have children. By the time his son turns 50, that initial 10 pieces of silver has grown into 167 pieces. That is the snowball. Then there is Anson, the sandal maker. He does not have a lump sum of 10 pieces of silver to start with. He just saves 2 pieces of silver every week. Over 8 years, through relentless mechanical consistency, he accumulates 1,040 pieces. The sandal maker is essentially the ancient equivalent of dollar cost averaging. He is not watching the macroeconomic trends of Babylon. He does not care if the price of grain is up or down that week. He just deposits his 2 pieces of silver every week without fail. We need to break down the actual mechanism for doing this today, because in 1926, when this was written, the stock market was a completely opaque casino for the average person. So when Housel and Felix say buy index funds, it is worth explaining what that actually means. In the 1920s, buying a stock meant betting your money on a single horse. You bought a share of a railroad company, and if that specific railroad went bankrupt, you lost everything. Today, an index fund allows you to basically buy the entire racetrack, which is immensely safer. You are buying a tiny fraction of Apple, Amazon, Microsoft, and roughly 497 other top companies all at once. You are not betting on which company wins. You are betting on the overall trajectory of global human productivity. Which brings us to the psychological problem Ben Felix points out. Compounding is incredibly boring. Waiting 40 years for the basket to overflow is painful. And because we have supercomputers in our pockets that let us trade individual stocks instantly, people get bored, and they try to be clever. They try to time the market. They want to find the next big stock before it takes off, so they do not have to wait 40 years to be rich. That boredom is destructive. The research Ben Felix presents is undeniable. Actively managed funds, giant pools of money run by professional investors whose entire job is picking those winning stocks, routinely fail to beat the returns of a simple, boring, passive index fund over a long time horizon. The professionals cannot even beat the index. The math shows that attempting to outsmart the system usually just destroys wealth. That boredom and the intense desire to be clever drives people directly into the trap of the fourth cure. Arcad explicitly warns his students about this. He says the penalty of risk is probable loss, and he begs them not to be misled by their own romantic desires to make wealth rapidly. That phrase, the romantic desire for rapid wealth, has not changed an inch since Babylon. Because when someone is struggling to make rent, and they see someone online claiming they turned $500 into $50,000 overnight trading a meme coin, the brain's risk assessment shuts down. The desperation for a shortcut overrides the math. It is the crypto crazes, it is the NFT bubbles, it is the day trading seminars promising you can quit your job tomorrow and trade currency from a beach. Arcad is saying that once you actually manage to save a little money, your own worst impulses are going to try to set it on fire. Ben Felix would argue that guarding your treasure today means protecting your principal from your own behavioral biases like overconfidence, the bias that makes you think you can beat the market when the evidence proves you almost certainly cannot. Which why the modern translation of guard thy treasures means accepting average market returns through diversified funds. It means ignoring the frenzy, The wisdom of experienced handlers that Arcad talks about in the book is not a person pitching you a complex investment scheme on social media. It is the market itself, the collective historical wisdom of the entire global market, priced into an index fund. Now we get to the most controversial part of the book, Cure 5. Arcad says, make of thy dwelling a profitable investment. He explicitly recommends that every man own the roof that shelters him, and he paints a deeply emotional picture of having a garden, a place for children to play, and never paying an exacting landlord again. And there is real psychological power in a paid-off mortgage. Arcad is not wrong about the emotional safety it provides. When you own a home outright, your baseline cost of survival drops dramatically. You have built a fortress. You are insulated from a landlord deciding to raise your rent because the market rate went up in your area. And for a lot of people, the forced saving mechanism of a monthly mortgage payment is the only way they will ever build any net worth. But if we take Arcad's advice to its logical conclusion today, we run headfirst into a real modern real estate problem. Look at the Diary of a CEO episode titled A House versus Stocks. Here is the truth. Ramit Sethi aggressively dismantles the assumption that buying a house is always a good investment. In the 1920s, maybe in 4000 BCE in Babylon, land was one of the only real measures of wealth. But today, a house is a highly illiquid asset. If you need cash tomorrow to cover a medical emergency, you cannot slice off a piece of it and sell it. This is where the concept of phantom costs comes in, something the original pamphlet completely ignores. People look at a mortgage payment and compare it directly to rent and think it is about the same. But they ignore property taxes, the interest that is heavily front-loaded on a 30-year loan, maintenance, the boiler breaking, insurance, closing costs. It is endless. Ramit Sethi's math shows that in many major cities right now, the total unrecoverable cost of home ownership wildly exceeds the cost of renting. It is worth giving some context on liquid equities here, since that is Ramit's alternative. Liquid equities are assets like the index funds already discussed, stocks you can sell on an app on a Tuesday and have the cash sitting in your account by Wednesday. Ramit argues that if you rent cheaply and aggressively invest the difference between your rent and what a mortgage would have cost you into liquid equities, you often end up significantly wealthier and far more mobile than someone who tied all their cash into a single physical structure in a single zip code. So the honest conclusion is conceding the mathematical reality of modern real estate while still respecting Arcad's underlying psychological goal. The spirit of Cure 5 is really about stabilizing your housing costs so you are not financially bleeding out in old age. Buying a house can do that eventually if you stay in it for 30 years, but it can no longer be blindly accepted as the only path to wealth. You have to run the math for your specific city, your specific interest rate, and your specific life. Stabilizing those costs in old age is the perfect transition to Cure 6. Ensure a future income. Arcad says you have to provide an advance for the needs of thy growing age and the protection of thy family, keeping in mind that Clason was literally writing this to sell life insurance and annuities to his corporate clients. This is the most transparently self-serving chapter in the whole pamphlet. But the underlying systemic issue it addresses is currently causing a generational problem. For a brief window in the 20th century, there was the pension era. A worker gave 30 years to a company, and the company guaranteed a defined benefit, a steady paycheck until they died. The company took on the investment risk. The individual never had to think about compounding, or index funds, or rebalancing a portfolio. That era is completely dead. We transitioned into what is called a defined contribution plan, and what that did was take the entire cognitive load of investment strategy, market risk, and longevity risk and place it squarely on the shoulders of the average worker, a worker with no financial training. David Bach talks about setting up buckets to handle this: an emergency bucket, a retirement bucket, a dream bucket. But the numbers discussed on Diary of a CEO are genuinely alarming. Over half of Americans have zero savings, and roughly 7 out of 10 are living paycheck to paycheck. So Cure 6 is failing on a systemic level right now, massively. The cognitive load of being your own portfolio manager while simultaneously navigating unprecedented housing costs and inflation is breaking people. Arcad says provide for old age, but when an entire paycheck is consumed just surviving the present, the future income ceases to exist, which means the only defensive strategy left is Cure 7, increase thy ability to earn. Arcad uses his own life story here. He was a scribe, carving cuneiform into wet clay tablets, but he noticed that some scribes carved faster and got paid more, so he studied them, increased his concentration, learned their techniques, and became the fastest scribe in Babylon, which allowed him to command a higher wage. He says you must cultivate your powers, study, and become more skillful. This introduces the concept of human capital, your actual physical and mental capacity to perform labor that the market values. For most people, human capital is their single largest financial asset, far exceeding whatever is sitting in a bank account. Arcad is saying you must continuously invest in upgrading that asset because frugality has a limit. You can only cut a budget so far, you still need to eat, you still need shelter, there is a hard floor to how much you can save. But there is no theoretical ceiling to how much you can earn. In an era where artificial intelligence is threatening to automate large parts of baseline knowledge work, being the person who just carves the clay tablet is not enough anymore. You have to be the person who learns how to program the machine that carves the tablet. It is the ultimate hedge against inflation and lifestyle creep. If the macroeconomy is eating your purchasing power, your strongest counterattack is upskilling, acquiring high-income skills, whether that is data analysis, complex project management, or advanced sales. Skills that let you command a disproportionate share of value in the modern economy. Right now, if you search for summaries of this book online, the analysis almost always stops here. The 7 cures are the bullet points everyone recites, but this deep dive means looking at the part of the book the internet ignores, the back half. The shift in the book's structure in its second half is genuinely clever. Clason drops the character of Arcad entirely and introduces a framing device set in modern times, modern for the 1930s at least. He presents a fictional letter dated October 21st, 1934, written by a professor named Caldwell from Nottingham University. Caldwell is an esteemed academic writing to an archaeological team in Mesopotamia. He tells them he has received their latest shipment of excavated clay tablets and has translated them. What this fictional professor discovers on these 5,000-year-old tablets is the diary of a camel trader named Dabasier, who was drowning in debt. Caldwell, the modern academic, admits in his letter that Dabasier's ancient debt problems perfectly mirror his own crushing debts in 1930s England, which is a genuinely smart storytelling move. Clason is using this fictional professor to tell the reader, I know you are ashamed of your debt. I know you feel like a failure. But look, even this respected professor is broke, and even people in antiquity ruined their lives with debt. It is a universal human failing. Dabasier's story is really the emotional core of the book. He borrowed money to fund a lifestyle he could not afford, fled the city in shame when he could not pay it back, and ended up enslaved in Syria. Only after hitting rock bottom does he realize he still has the soul of a free man, and he escapes to face his creditors back in Babylon. When he returns, he institutes a mathematically rigid system to clear his name. Exactly 20% of his income goes directly to paying down his debts, distributed evenly among everyone he owes. He keeps 70% to live on and saves the final 10%, which is the very first cure. What is fascinating is how this fictional camel trader's formula maps almost perfectly onto modern debt reduction strategies, the kind discussed by David Bach. In modern personal finance, there is the Avalanche method, where you attack the debt with the highest interest rate first, and the snowball method, where you pay off the smallest balances first for a quick psychological win. But the exact mathematical sequence matters less than the psychological shift Dabasier makes. He arrives at a crucial realization: debts are enemies to be dealt with. Lenders are friends who trusted you. Let us be real, though. Lenders are friends who trusted you is an incredibly tough pill to swallow when you are staring at a predatory 24% annual rate on a credit card statement. It feels like they are the enemy, but the underlying utility of that mindset is about reclaiming agency. As long as you view your debt as a shameful secret you have to hide from, you are paralyzed. Once you treat it as a mathematical equation, you are actively managing. The anxiety loses its power over you. Alongside Dabasier's redemption, Clason introduces the 5 laws of gold. There is no need to recite all 5, because they mostly act as an extension of the 7 cures, but their focus is entirely defensive. The cures are the offensive playbook, how you go out into the world and acquire the money. The laws are the defensive playbook. They state that gold flees the man who forces it toward impossible earnings, or who trusts it to tricksters, or who trusts it to his own inexperience. It is the behavioral economics of losing money. Once you have a little bit of wealth, every scammer, every bad business pitch from a relative, and every one of your own worst greedy impulses is going to collaborate to try to separate you from it. You have to shift from an acquisition mindset to a fortress mindset, which brings us to honestly the most uncomfortable tension in this entire deep dive. We have to confront the foundational assumption of this book, and honestly, the foundational assumption of almost all modern personal finance advice. Let us talk about the mediocrity cycle. At the very beginning of the book, before we even meet Arcad, we meet 2 men, Banseer the chariot builder and Kobe the musician. They are sitting on the walls of Babylon looking down at the immense wealth of the city, and they are deeply depressed. Banseer says, I have worked incredibly hard my entire life. I build the strongest chariots in the city. You play the best music. We are not lazy. We do good work. And yet our purses are completely empty. Clason's implication here is heavily rooted in 1920s American bootstrap capitalism. He is explicitly stating that poverty, or a lack of wealth, is simply a lack of financial education and personal discipline. He is saying that Dabasier and Kobe are not poor because the system is unfair. They are poor because they do not know the mathematical laws of the egg basket. If they just had the discipline to save 10%, they would be rich like Arcade. That is his whole premise. But we have to drag that assumption into the harsh light of the data. 7 out of 10 people are living paycheck to paycheck. Over half the country has no emergency savings. Are we really prepared to sit here and say that 70% of the population simply lacks personal discipline, that they are all just buying too many lattes and upgrading their phones too often? Or are there other massive systemic economic forces at play that Arcade never had to deal with? The economy today is undeniably brutal in ways Clason could not have even modeled. There are decades of wage stagnation relative to worker productivity. There are housing costs and rent inflation that have wildly outpaced median income growth, completely disconnected from wages. There are healthcare and higher education systems designed to extract massive debt just for the privilege of participating in the middle class. So, to look at a single mother working 2 jobs just to cover rent and groceries and tell her she is poor because she is not paying herself first is not just mathematically ignorant, it is cruel. It is incredibly out of touch. It assumes a level playing field and a baseline surplus that simply does not exist for millions of people today. This pushback matters because it is the fatal flaw of the entire personal finance industry. The advice always assumes you start at 0, but millions of people are starting well below 0. If your baseline survival expenses require more than all of your income, taking out 10% for an investment account does not fatten your purse. It means the electricity gets shut off on Thursday. The systemic critique is absolutely valid. The board is tilted. But, and this is the painful synthesis we have to arrive at, acknowledging that the economy is unfair does not actually solve your personal financial crisis. It does not pay your rent. You cannot control the interest rate decisions of a central bank. You cannot control corporate price increases or national housing policy. So instead of comparing it to a stormy ocean where you just throw your hands up and let go of the rudder, think of it like a video game. The economy right now is set to hard mode. In 1950, maybe the game was on easy mode. A single income could buy a house and support a family. Today, the difficulty is dialed up sharply. Housing costs hit harder, inflation hits harder. But here is the critical part. The underlying rules of the game have not changed. The mathematics of compound interest, the pull of lifestyle creep, the necessity of spending less than you earn, those rules are identical. And because the game is on hard mode, your personal execution has to be nearly flawless. You cannot afford to make the sloppy mistakes Dabasier and Kobe made. You cannot afford to ignore a repayment plan for your debt. You cannot afford to buy the actively managed fund instead of the index fund. There is zero margin for error. The economy is not going to hand you that $10,000 life-changing buffer David Bach talked about. The system is not going to hand it to you. The only lever you actually possess to pull yourself out of the mediocrity cycle is the ruthless application of Arcade's ancient math to whatever small margins you can carve out of your income. It requires an unfair level of discipline, but it is the only viable strategy on the board. The true genius of George Clason was not that he discovered some magical secret to wealth. His genius was that he identified fundamental, unavoidable mathematical and behavioral truths and packaged them so well that they survived a century. He took the bitter, incredibly difficult pill of financial discipline and wrapped it in the sweetness of ancient mythology. He created a bank advertisement that accidentally functioned as a life raft. It strips away all the modern financial jargon and leaves you with the raw behavioral choice. Are you going to consume everything you produce today, or are you going to capture a fraction of your labor to buy back your freedom tomorrow? So, 10% like Arcade said, or 12.5% like Bach says. Honestly, it does not matter which number you pick today. What matters is whether you pick one at all. If money is governed today by the exact same laws as it was 6,000 years ago in Babylon, what does that say about human nature? Are we destined to always fight the exact same internal battle between the pull of buying what we want today and the freedom of buying back our time tomorrow? Think about that the next time you tap your card.